Welcome back, everyone. We're heading into our second to last session in the leadership stream, Closing the Gap, Reactive to Preventative Maintenance, with Devin Arrow and Joanne Wood. Devin Arrow started his career in engineering, running projects for water, sewer, and roads. Currently, Devin manages many aspects of the City of Dawson Creek's infrastructure operations and maintenance, including water and sewer treatment, roads, deep utilities, and fleet. Through this, he has learned that responsible stewardship of infrastructure involves bringing the entire team in on the big picture so that everyone can collaborate, learn, and grow together to provide service excellence to the community. When managing the Water and Environmental Department, he led the implementation of a preventative maintenance program, which fundamentally changed the way the department operated. Joining Devin is Joanne Wood, who has 17 years of experience in training and education, including professional, management, and leadership development. Her industry experience includes education, manufacturing, professional services, social media analysis, and technology. Joanne facilitates long-lasting changes that impact effectiveness, productivity, and adoption through a thoughtful blend of accelerated learning techniques and change management. Through engaging, interactive approaches and creative learning experiences, she establishes excellent rapport with participants. There is no death by PowerPoint. In her spare time, Joanne is a cast iron restoration expert and loves to talk about skillets. Over to you, Devin and Joanne.
Good day. Thank you, Kalpana. I really appreciate that intro on both of us. I'd like to welcome everyone to our session here on Closing the Gap. This is about our journey of moving from reactive to preventative maintenance. As Kalpana mentioned, I'm Devin Arrow. I'm the Public Works Manager for the City of Dawson Creek. That's recent. I've worked for the city for the past 11 years, and I have my PMP, my Project Management Professional certification through the Project Management Institute, and also my Applied Science Technologist designation through EOCP. Previous to my role as the Public Works Manager, as Kalpana mentioned, I worked as the Water Resource Manager, and I also worked in the Engineering Department. The reason I wanted to bring this session to you guys today at this amazing conference this year is because most of us, if not all of us, have been part of an implementation or a change in process at some point in our careers. I wanted to share my experiences in this forum so you could get some ideas and learn from my experiences so you can apply these learnings to your own organizations. My relationship to Fix and Joanne, at the start of my journey from moving from reactive to preventative, I spent a lot of time making sure I chose the right software to help us leverage technology and set us up for success. We landed on Fix to assist us in creating our solution, and our relationship just grew enough over the past few years that I've asked them and a member of their superstar cast to come join me today and to talk about how we approach change management, knowing that it's so critical to a successful implementation. So at this point, I'd like to welcome Joanne, myself, Training and Education Senior Manager for Fix. Joanne, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, you are so welcome. And I do promise today's not the day I'll talk about skillets, even though I'd like to. So thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here and really appreciate you having me. So in my role, besides doing training, which is really important, I'm also the change management practitioner. So that's really helping clients empower their workforce and helping that workforce adopt new behaviors, like moving from pen and paper to a CMMS. So what I'd like to do is tell you just a little bit more about Fix, and that is that we are here at Fix, we are a CMMS, or a computerized maintenance management system. And we help organizations move from that pen and paper to software, which we call a digital transformation. So once your maintenance operations, once all the information is connected, it really allows you to make data-driven decisions in your day-to-day and really make very significant changes. So let's see what we're going to talk about today. And that really is, we're going to listen to Devin. He has a really compelling story about his experience and adopting a new CMMS and moving from reactive maintenance to preventative maintenance. So by the end of the webinar, I really want you to take from it the best practices for leading change and then also participating in the change and building new habits. I also want you to know what to expect, because Devin's going to share some stories with us that will show the ups and downs of what happened. And a huge thing we'll be talking about is those early adopters and those detractors and how you take those people and make them into champions. And you might be asked to be a champion yourself in an organizational change. So what data will measure success? How can we look at KPIs? Those are all things we'll also be talking about in the process. So let's go ahead here. And I just want to really start with this amazing visual that I think really signifies the backstory. So Devin, can you just tell us the backstory of where you were and why you decided that you needed to make some changes?
Yeah, so the dreaded whiteboard. Back when I first come to the water treatment plant, we had this fantastic, I call it an annual procedural calendar. It's where we put all of our tribal knowledge, everything, all the information that all the operators had up here, and we kind of dump it into here. The problem with the whiteboard, and this is only half, the other half isn't shown in the photo. And the whiteboard was so big, actually, we had to cut a hole out for the intercom to fit inside of it because it took up the entire wall. As you're crossing things off daily, weekly, monthly, it gets a little more complicated once, oh, well, I didn't quite get to that, but did we finish that? Well, I think I crossed that one off last week. You can see in the corner, our public works department drew a nice little kitty face for us because they had been to collect the recycling at the time. And whiteboard, communal messaging. At the end of the day, we had a lot of pain points that came out of this whiteboard and to come out of our just struggling to react every day. We had a fast moving environment, and we still do. And we struggled maintaining that ongoing tribal knowledge and passing down that information from person to person. As a result, we were very reactive. We had a lot of those 2 a.m. callouts that I'm sure a lot of our participants today are aware of and familiar with on a regular basis. And those had a cost way past the financial. There were staffing concerns, right? We had limited staffing resources. Guys were getting, and like our staff were getting burned out just from having to constantly react to these things after hours. As a result, we were having high turnover. The morale was maybe not as good as it could have been, and the motivation was maybe a little bit lacking. It got to a point where people began to dread taking the phone home at the end of the day because they just didn't know what that night was going to be, or they knew it was going to be another sleepless night. So I took this and I saw an opportunity in this whiteboard to transition to a digital system to leverage technology to help us with some of these issues.
And how, Devin, did you think that the CMMS, like what exactly was that going to solve for you?
Well, the technology, I'd been a part of a few previous failed implementations of software in general before, and I knew a simple spreadsheet or a Outlook calendar wasn't going to do it for us. And those couple failed implementations, I'll share a couple of my stories. I was part of an e-payroll that our finance had done for us. They just kind of dropped it in their end users' lap, end users being us, the management. It was met with massive resistance. I still remember the meeting. There was some heated arguments. It failed. Nobody picked it up. Nobody did anything with it. I myself tried to implement a records management system when I was back in my engineering days. I failed to get buy-in from my end users, the other people around me. And I didn't really plan the implementation well. It was kind of more, we'll figure it out as we go, or we'll do it when we get there. And as a result, that also failed. So after those couple of implementations, I had a few takeaways and lessons learned. And I really felt that a software solution like a CMS was going to be sophisticated enough to be able to deal with these things as long as we manage that change and manage that project properly. So through that process, I intuitively applied some of these change management approaches based on my project management experience. And Joanne and I will speak to a few of these a little bit later. But some of the key considerations that we need to make sure we have at all times was consistent and constant communication. I had regular check-ins, weekly stand-up meetings, frequent collaboration sessions to figure out, what's working, what's a roadblock, what can I do to support them and improve the system. I also set down realistic expectations. It's this software solution, whatever we come up with, is not a silver bullet. It's not going to solve all your problems. It may actually cause more problems for you in the short term than it solves. You may have problems you didn't even know about. But the thing is, it will be a lot of work, but at the end of the day, it's going to help you. It will take time to implement, and it will change how we do business. It will fundamentally change your day-to-day. And also, one of the other key considerations I had was end user buy-in. It has to work for the people that are using that system. So by allowing the people to use the system, make some choices early on and throughout the process, and collaborating often, and actually listening to their concerns and trying to address them, we were getting small wins throughout that built that momentum. And then we continued to get small wins that maintain that momentum.
Excellent. So you had really analyzed your previous pain points, and then you also had some background on what didn't work before. So as you were considering and implementing a new CMMS, What did you do to put together a team? Who did you pull in? What were the considerations there?
Yeah, so I maybe did things a little bit differently. I had the good fortune to be working with a person at City Hall that used to be a project software implementation manager. So I took some things away, and what she said to me was, "You need a project team. You cannot do this on the side of your desk." So how we did it a little differently is I built a project team. I brought a senior operator in that had just retired who knew the system really well to bring the data and just compile it all and put all the equipment down on paper. And then I got an admin support to come in and actually put that into our digital system. But it's important to note that even though your manager may be making these decisions, because I think a lot of the people on this in the session today, maybe are not management, maybe they're operators, there's opportunities to become actively involved and to impact that project team, even if you're not the one directly controlling it. So by being that, I identified and empowered some champions. These are early adopters. These are people that have an interest in it, that have maybe an interest in it for the wrong reasons. But anytime they're asking questions, anytime you're really involved, you can be a champion. And let's call my champion Gord for the sake of this webinar. And those champions can help lead change from within on a peer basis, on a peer perspective, and provide valuable technical subject matter expertise while you're building that system.
Perfect. And so we will talk often about champions. They're very, very important. And so your champions, did you get them from each stakeholder group? Can you tell us a little bit about, what a champion was in your eyes?
Yeah, so in project management, you talk about stakeholder groups. In project management, one of the frameworks is different knowledge areas, and one of them is stakeholder management. Stakeholders being, in this case, with software implementation, being your end users. So a champion is, like I said, anybody that's interested in it, good, bad, or otherwise. They're involved, they're invested. Either they think it's garbage, or they really want to know because they're really excited about it, or they're like, man, there's a lot of potential here. In order to be a champion, you've got to speak up. You got to raise your hand. You got to try to be sensitive also to the bigger picture that your manager, your team leader is responsible for, because just pushing may not get the answer. But some expectations in order to be a champion, they need to be laid out for you. It will be hard. The solution, again, may cause more problems, and you're going to have to work through it. As a result, you may have frustrations. But if you maintain constant communication as you work through it with your team lead, it will get better. And that constant communication is going to build trust with your project or team lead. And that trust is going to get you more responsibility, is going to give you broader access to the system, usually. And you're able to have those honest communication and those honest talks with your team lead.
Excellent. Thank you. So what Devin is really talking about is what we in change management are looking at, sort of the people process here. So when we are looking at a project, we'll often have, someone like Devin involved as a project manager. And we often bring in somebody to do change management. So the principles we're talking about today are really embraced in our change management philosophy. In this case, I'm using one from Prosy. And what we're looking at is just making sure that that's embedded throughout the entire process. So you want to make sure that people really understand, because this is a complex and difficult process, and the change that's going to be happening is inevitable. So when I look at projects like Devin had mentioned, the failed projects beforehand, it's often the people side of change that fails, not the great meetings, not the organization that you have to roll it out. And what we often see is that people invest far more in the technical rollout than they ever do in the people aspect of that change. So this is a diagram I often use when I'm explaining the principles that we want. And again, this model is called the ADKAR model and represents 5 very tangible and really concrete outcomes that you use for lasting change. Let me show you right here. Excellent. And so really, when we're looking at that change, one of the things that we want is, does everyone involved know why the change is happening? So it's really human nature to want to understand the reasoning behind an action or required change. And so what Devin had done really early in communicating frequently and quickly was that he let everybody know and understand the nature of the change, why it was being made, and most importantly, the risk of not changing. So those pain points that he had outlined at the beginning, why pen and paper wasn't working for him, what was happening within the organization that prompted them to get a CMMS. He made sure that everyone really understood that. And so awareness includes the internal, the external drivers that created the need for change, as well as that very famous WIFM statement, or the what's in it for me. So we want to make sure that everyone knows that there's an awareness for the need for change, not just awareness that the change is happening. And that's a really important distinction. We then have this concept around desire, and really that's getting everybody motivated to participate in the change. And we want everyone to support it. So, this is really going back to those pain points and helping people understand that taking that phone home didn't need to be as painful as it was. And those 2 a.m. calls, while they're still going to happen, don't need to happen quite as much as you move into preventative maintenance rather than just doing the reactive. So he really went and made sure that everybody was aware of their personal circumstance and how it was going to affect them. And then we have our knowledge component, and you'll see that in order for change to happen, that training is really in the middle. So people have a very good idea of why they're in training before they go ahead and do that training. And in training, we can then cover the processes, the school, the tools, the roles and responsibilities. So if you are here with me and you're an operator, what I'm proposing to you is that you ask the questions about why and how before you accept any knowledge, because it will really put everything in context and make it situational for you, and you'll understand the pain points that will really help your learning. So keep that in mind. And the last two steps are ability and reinforcement. And one of the things Devin is going to talk about is how he supported people in the field as they continued their learning process. So it's taking that intellectual understanding and really applying it so that it becomes second nature and you can make those in the moment decisions that you need to. And coaching becomes an important part of that. So we'll think back to Devin's choice of champions, people who could coach in the field. And then finally, is there reinforcement in that change? And that reinforcement is intrinsic or extrinsic and can be simply everything from a recognition of an improvement. We see a lot of data improvements when you implement a CMMS, but it's also improving quality of life and work-life balance, being able to pass your audits. I mean, it's all of those things that make your life a little bit easier in the long run. So let me just move on here. And so what I want to know now, Devin, is you were obviously in the technical side of things. How did you help with the implementation, and what were the people considerations?
Well, yeah, like I mentioned before, I'm a PMP, right? So part of our training in the framework and project management framework is I mentioned again the knowledge areas, things like scope, time, cost, resources. But 90% of your project management is communication. It all comes down to communication, right? So I was always working to ensure my end users, which are my operators, they was aware of what was going on. I had set clear expectations of what they could expect from the software and what I expected of them and what they could expect from me. And as a team, we held each other accountable for that in a respectful and honest way, right? And as a result, they were actively involved in the process from start to finish. So finding a champion, talking about finding Gord, was really helpful in solidifying that development of the system from within the team. That champion was able to take it to that next level, and he was able to do things that I just couldn't, because as operators, all the operators sitting here on this call today are experts, technical subject matter experts of their own systems. Nobody knows it better than them. So you need those champions, you need those people to input into the system to really take it to the next level and be successful.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And did you have any other champions that you were working with?
At the time, I only had Gord, but then Gord actually moved on to greener pastures, and I had identified another, it was a contractor employee actually that was really invested in the system. He's always asking questions. Hey, if this is wrong, hey, can you change this? This isn't exactly right. And I said to him, you know what? I think we could work with this, but I think I'd like you to make the changes yourself. He said, what do you mean? So I have this thing that I call God mode, and it's a complete trust in the system, in these people. And I give them really broad access. They have access to everything. And the expectation is here, I'm giving you access to everything. Whatever you don't know or you're not sure of, don't touch. Rather than that, I want you to go in and I want you to make these changes. And then, just let me know. Let me know what's going on. Let me know if you're hitting any roadblocks, and I'll help you get through those things.
So a takeaway here, really, you found your champions, you trusted them, and you gave them a lot of responsibility.
It comes down to trust. and responsibility. Your champions can't do anything if you don't give them any power to do anything. At the end of the day, it worked out for me because I didn't have any time. I was managing 20 projects at the same time, plus my operational team. I didn't have time to administer the system. But also, like we mentioned, the operators, this is their system. I need them to get in. I need them to start playing with it. I need to get them owning it. And ever since my transition away from the water treatment plant, I've moved over now to public works for the last about 2 months. Our operators have owned that system themselves. I'm not there. I'm not involved, but it's still running pretty well.
A lot of people are under the impression that software implementation happens as soon as you roll it out and as soon as you test it. But we've talked about coaching and reinforcement and training. What were your expectations around timelines?
Well, the expectations around timelines, again, I mentioned I had that really good fortune to be with that software implementation project manager. And I asked her, I said, okay, what's the shortest amount of time I can do this? And she has implemented software for harbors all around the world. And she said the shortest time I've ever been able to do this was 6 months. It was a bunch of Germans and they had a dedicated project team. So she said, normally most places, most organizations, 9 months to a year and a half. So I set clear expectations with my team and clear expectations also with my senior staff to let them know, hey, this is a long-term goal. And then when I brought in that project team, I mentioned the senior operator and the administrator, part of their expectations was to actually help transition us to the implementation to our operators. So they didn't just cut it off after they they got all the data in. They continued to help assist and administer and support our operators as they slowly had uptake in the system themselves and started using it on a day-to-day basis.
So, speaking of timelines, I love to show this slide, Devin, because it really helps illustrate for me what I experience every day, which is technology really has an adoption curve. So, after training, what happened in the field and where are your people now in this curve?
Yeah, so this curve is awesome, and we actually talk about it in project management as well. You have your 10% of our innovators and early adopters, and you've got your 10% of people that almost will never adopt, the laggards. Everybody else in the middle is just kind of waiting to see what happens with the first 10%, right? Those are the 10% are like those people in line at the Apple Store for the newest phone, right? They're ready to go. They don't care what it is. They're in it because it's cool, it's new, and they can see the potential. Your champion is generally going to be in your first 10%. They may be techie and they may be not, but anyway, they're ready to take that risk that maybe the general populace isn't, right? And by taking that champion and then him showing his peers, hey, it's actually not that hard. This is actually pretty easy, and look at all the cool things I can do. You start to build that buy-in with the rest of the team. You start to get them going, and you start to bring in the early majority and the late majority as they come. It's important to remember on this curve, though, everybody kind of comes at a different speed. Everybody gets comfortable at a different speed. And you just have to be aware of that. And again, communication is key to that.
Excellent. And what has the impact been as you have been going through this and moving from innovators all the way through to your majority? How has it impacted your organization so far?
Well, it's been really, really interesting, actually. So our operators, they first, like I had my early adopter and he started making changes, and this created a bit of a feedback loop. And all of a sudden now the operators are bouncing ideas off each other in the lunchroom all the time. And then they're starting to be more open during meetings and biweekly check-ins because there's that trust that are happening in the meetings. And I maintain close communication with Fix at the same time. And as a result, now we're getting to a point where our veteran operators are teaching our younger operators. So as a result, to go from an expert to a master, you need to be able to coach and you need to be able to teach. And that's what they're doing, is they're teaching the new operators. The new operators are getting on board faster because they have access to all this files, all this data right at their fingertips. And we're using it as a training session. And at the end of the day, we're able to pull up data faster. Our operators are able to get more information. If they're not spending their days looking for what type of oil they're looking for. Oh, I need a special wrench. Where did that go again? It's in Fix. It's on their phone. They pull it up. It's there. And it's making our jobs more efficient. Not to mention, I look like a rock star when I sit in a boardroom with a bunch of senior execs and they ask me what that pump can pull. And I pull up the pump curve, the manual. I say, oh, it's about 90 liters a second. And they go, wow, you did that fast. It's our system, right? So it just makes our lives easier so we can focus on doing the fun things.
And at this point, would you say that digital transformation and moving from reactive to preventative has become part of the culture?
Yeah, like the digital transformation, the record keeping side of those things, that started to become part of our daily life. And I always took a perspective is you need to treat it like safety. In our industry, as a lot of the people sitting here in this conference know, safety is a way of life. It's what you do every day. It's not something you do on top of everything else you do. And by taking that perspective that this records management and then this CMMS is just part of what you do, you work in the system daily, you check into it. At the end of the day, you write your notes at the end of the day, you make sure things are up to speed. It all becomes that much easier because it's just part of what you do now. It's not that extra thing on top of all the other things you have to do.
Perfect. And one of the tips or tricks I love to share is that when I'm looking at my innovators and my early adopters and I'm selecting champions, that social credibility is really important. But I'll often also choose a detractor, or I will choose someone who has maybe a slow learning curve to technology. So someone who is not really comfortable learning it. And I'll get them on board because that social credibility, seeing them do it, it's like if Greg can do it, anybody can do it, really helps move everyone along. So that's always a great early success or an early win for me. I'd like to talk a little bit too about the emotional component of this, because what we often see is that, like when I work with clients, I anticipate pushback and I anticipate moments of frustration before we break through and really see that intended behavior. So people often have, in my humble experience, really insecurity about learning something new, especially if they're not really comfortable with it. So we're technology based, and when we move from pen to paper through to bringing in the CMMS, I get trepidation and fear out of a lot of people. Are they timing my work? Are they, why do I have to write notes? Was I not doing my job correctly? Are they looking to replace me with a computer? That's a big one. So I think it's really important to acknowledge the fear, not just to the people who will be learning, but also to the key executives as well. Because if they go do a state of the nation check, they go do a temperature check on the floor, if you have a manager and everybody is very emotional or has concerns or impacts, I'd like to have called that out before. So does this slide resonate with you, Devin?
Yeah, and if you take this slide and you Google that, you also get the 5 stages of grief. So it's pretty interesting to see, and it's also important. It absolutely does, and it's important to remember though that not all people go through these emotional transitions at the same speed or with the same intensity. Somebody that's more risk averse might go through it a little bit slower, and the feelings of insecurity and blaming others and sudden shock are going to be a lot more intense than somebody that's ready to jump on the bandwagon and go. Right? It's also important to remember that not all people learn in the same way. So that's why communicating and teaching through different modes is so very important to get us through those frustrations, those worries, that insecurity, and get us closer to and quicker to accepting, testing, and feeling optimistic about the solution, right? So I strongly encourage a lot of our participants today to ask for their style of learning method that they prefer to make sure they're learning as effectively as possible. So if you learn, if you learn in person or Zoom, talk about it. There's your audio. Training and hands-on sessions if you're a doer. Webinars or how-to videos if you learn by seeing. These are all different ways you should look to address the discovery and learning process for yourself to make sure you're getting as much as you can out of it.
So the trainer in me absolutely loves that, Devin, and I think that that's so important. And when you mention you see people at different points, do you also see this in terms of everboarding as well? So we know that people, come and they're always continually learning, or they'll come back from furlough or come back from a leave. Where does that put them?
Yeah, everboarding is an interesting concept. You talk about onboarding when you first bring a system in, but everboarding is when you just continually keep the system going. You might have somebody coming back from a leave, you might have a new operator in where everybody knows the system, but they've forgotten how to train that first person. So part of that everboarding and part of our culture that we have, the city of Dawson Creek, is that learning is constant. It's not a one and done. Onboarding events are a continuous process. So as a result, we talked about our veteran users. Now they're training those new users. Those new operators are finding it as a training exercise as well. And we're using it, it's also part of ongoing performance management, right? We're able to, through these changes and whatever else, we're learning to track effort. I can track effort, preventative versus emergency maintenance. And in that way, it allows me to ensure I know the areas that need the support for my team, so I can allocate those resources appropriately and support my operators when they need it.
And in terms of recognition, has any of this made its way into any kind of assessment or recognition at the end of the year?
Recognition at the end of the year, like, well, I don't get a lot of thank yous for what I do, but but at the end of the day, the recognition to me is that this preventative maintenance system, especially Fix, has been picked up by multiple departments. We're now using it for fleet. Our stores and storekeeper are picking it up to match, to start to inventory parts. Our facilities and maintenance, they are using it for all of our facilities across the city, and the pool is also using it as well. So when you get that kind of buy-in, I started with 5 users. I now have at least 20. It's just starting to snowball. And now, myself, I've become the point person for Fix. I've worked extensively with Joanne and the rest of the team at Fix. But really, at the end of the day, that is my recognition that people have nothing but good things to say about it, and they want to work within it. That means that whatever we're doing right.
Excellent. And as you onboard those new teams, we really are going to be, in essence, rinse, wash, rinse, repeat, right? Because we're going to take those principles and those learnings that we did, but now we also have success stories to share from the main implementation and how successful it was. So those smaller departments that join up will also actually it will be an easier time, but we also have to recognize that their experience may have also been challenging. So lots of factors that go into it. So, Devin, we have finished our slides. I would love to take some questions. So I will ask the moderator. Moderator, are there any questions that we can answer?
I will just have a look. Let me see here. I do not have any questions quite yet, but sometimes it's if people are expecting that the session's going to finish a little bit later. Oh, I have one. There's a question here from Diana. What kind of steps or actions does the utility needed to take in advance to qualify to commission this program, such as asset inventory, utility location system, HR, etc.? So what type of actions or steps did the utility need to take in advance?
Specific to implementation, I can speak to that because I brought it right from start to finish. We didn't take any steps until my first step was to go through a very thorough process to find Fix, but then it was a thoughtful process on what we needed to do once we had the system. I was lucky enough that we didn't have a system before Fix. So I was able to mold our system to Fix and make sure that we were able to work as efficiently, as effectively as possible. Some things to consider when you're looking for a CMS solution. It needs to work for your end users. I went through 5 or 6 different webinars with different companies. I said I needed to work like Facebook, Twitter, like Instagram. Nobody has a big red binder to use any of those systems. They just work. And that's the same case. And I had different software solutions. Oh, we'll fly you down to Texas for a week and we'll do the training. I don't want that. Part of that Everboarding is if I'm Everboarding and I need to send people constantly to Texas, it's not going to work for me, right? So once I had that and we brought our project team in, we thoughtfully had a couple meetings together to figure out, okay, what information do we need? How can we most effectively go out into our system and gather the data that we need, and how are we going to get that into the system, the most efficiently, and start using it?
And Devin, I'd like to add that in some implementations, the pen and paper process is fantastic. It's a high quality process. What we're doing there is just digitizing it. In others, there were pain points in the pen and paper process. And what we're actually doing is not just implementing, but an entire process improvement. So the information you would need in those circumstances is very different. But the implementation teams, will help lead you through that and help you assess through discovery what it is that can improve.
Okay, I have another question. How do you deal with gently used or experienced operators who are reluctant to start using these project management tracking systems?
Oh, that's a good one, Devin. That's for both you and I. So I'll let you get started with your story, and then I will share some of my field stories too.
So from my perspective with the implementation, I was lucky enough to not have any of those real strong detractors in my team, but there's a couple strategies you could employ. The classic answer I hear often enough in interviews is to just talk to their manager. but this only may further demotivate them and increase the gap that you're looking for. So communicating clearly on how this is going to benefit them and make their life better in the long term is probably the most effective way to go. You may need to explain it in different ways that, at the end of the day, this is minimal effort on their part, but it transfers effort from another task into this task. So it's the same amount of time, such as searching for what type of oil a motor needs. At the end of the day, you could be putting that information in now to save yourself then. You can prove to them simply by doing, show them how much more you can accomplish once you just get into the system and do, and look what I can do. Like, look at these things. Wow, my life is awesome. And at the end of the day, just be inclusive and positive about the system. No matter how resistant that person is, just be positive.
Okay. Perfect. Hello, moderator. I'm just going to add a little
No,
bit
please do go ahead. We've got plenty of time. Go ahead.
So when you are choosing your champions and you're looking at implementing this because the organization has made a decision, one of these people who you anticipate as being your challenge should be a champion. They should be brought into the stakeholder team. They should have their opinions, their feedback brought in and implemented as well. So they need to be part of the process for several reasons. They probably have many cohorts who are exactly like them. And so what we want to do is build them into the program. And we want that credibility, that kind of pure credibility. So many things, that I ask in the beginning really have to do, I have my top-down messaging from the organization. This is what's going to happen if we don't do it. This is why we need it as a business. But then on the field level, I have my bottom-up messaging. So what I want to know is who is impacted by going home late, who on my team who is close to retirement really, has been tasked with the jobs they don't actually want to be doing because we didn't have really great resourcing back and forth, or we weren't in control of those reactive work orders. How much firefighting are we doing? I mean, none of these situations are comfortable. So can I find their pain points and speak directly to them so that we see a benefit there? And we really start off with the conversation. I call it skill versus will. Most of the time, I have met people who are fearful, and that's really what causes their challenges or their resistance to change. Once we alleviate that, people tend to come along, and especially if you reinforce a slow transition, a learning process that's inclusive, and coaching and on the floor. At some point, maybe it is going to be simply will, in which case that's a different conversation. But in all of my years of doing this, it's generally turned around, and I really find that it's just choosing the right champions. And sometimes those are the champions who you don't even know that they'll be good champions, but you bring them along and they do become an important part of the project.
Okay, thank you. And I have a question, and it's basically, do you have any tips on how to get more training to use the software more effectively?
That's a good question for Joanne, but in our fix system, we have a help button on every page, and there's lots of different resources. But Joanne, go ahead.
Sure. So I think it's really being clear when you are doing a change is that one of the people components is really how does everyone learn? I, for example, don't learn through video. So watching a video does nothing for me. I would rather have a bulleted 10 list of instructions because that makes sense. Once you know or have assessed your general group, your audience, and you know how it is they learn, and sometimes that can be cultural, like we only learn when you bring donuts, lady. That's good. I'll bring donuts. That's fine. And sometimes it's really based on the really generation. I mean, lots of different things. So we're going to assess their learning needs, and then you're going to ask of your vendor or of your project lead that we are using all of those different techniques. So we want something kinesthetic on the floor. We want people to experience and have that experiential learning. We want a reinforcement when they do well. We want people to be able to read the content and have access to it whenever the learning is applicable for them. So for some people that's at night, for some people that's on lunch, or they have special time allotted for them. And then we also want to have live instruction where they can get really instant feedback. So I'm just looking and assessing the audience, and then we're coming up with a training plan. And really anybody who's in partnership with you should be willing to do those things as well.
Okay, and I have another question. How might you tackle the task of transition into a CMS during a turnover where previous experts are no longer available or willing to assist with the transition? Is it easier to start from scratch or continue to pursue the historical information?
That is a tough one, absolutely. And the reason, so I mean, we can contrast it to my own experience where I had somebody that was willing to come in that knew the system. You could use it as an opportunity. Really, I could have used anybody. The reason I used our ex-senior operator was largely because he knew the system. I didn't have to spend a lot of time with him. But you could use that as a training opportunity for your operators as you go through to learn the system as they go, because you're getting into every nut and bolt, you're finding every manual, you're doing those things. Important to remember, though, you're not doing this on the side of your desk. You're not doing it as a 2 hours at the end of the week kind of thing. You do need to dedicate the time, but you could rotate it through your team so everybody gets to learn different parts of the system, and they also get to learn your CMMS as you go. And I mean, just my basic thoughts on that. Joanne, do you have anything to add to that, you think?
Well, I think that's a very compelling story to the pain point in itself, right? Is that tribal knowledge needs to be captured and put back in the system. It needs to be documented as data and processed so that it doesn't happen again. So when you have
We're going
lost
to be done soon, so I'll go up.
Sure. So when you've lost key information, it's really important that you bring that. I think that that becomes the organizational pain point right there. It can be a great transformation for complete change and new process. And if you're going to take a look at it, getting in there and reconstructing some of the things. Again, not all pen and paper is broken though. Sometimes it is, it's a world-class process, and we're just documenting it.
Sorry. And then I do have one final question, and it would be applicable to both of you. Have you been on projects where there are some aspects that are givens, i.e. there is no opportunity for real input, and other aspects where there is opportunity for some real input? If you have, how do you plan and communicate for that situation?
Yeah, I think everybody's kind of been like, I shared my own story where we just dropped, the software was dropped in our lap and saying, here you go. It doesn't really work very well, but I mean, it's yours and it works for us and you got to figure it out. That is a very difficult situation. Absolutely. I mean, for my end, I'm a communicator. I build trust with that and have honest communications. That does not work for everybody, because in order to do that, you need to make yourself vulnerable first to build that relationship with whoever it is that's dropping this in your lap. Joanne, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, the pain points that I often see are lack of communication from the actual organization and lack of executive sponsorship. So most often what I see are either conflicting projects running at the same time. So we are going to implement a brand new ERP at the same time we're doing this CMMS, and it's chaotic. And it's also not getting an executive sponsor who will clearly share with transparency why the organization is moving. So if I've worked with someone in procurement and those decisions have been made, I really like to get the executives, the decision makers in a room so that they can be there, because if you don't, it can be challenging. But we can also take the thoughts from sales, like you try to get as much information as you can and find somebody who's maybe not an executive but who can sponsor the project and who does have some credibility with the field. And I think that that's the key point, is that everyone is willing to make changes. You do often have to adapt. Not everybody is available to do all of the best practices in a change management situation. But you really, again, that vulnerability, that transparency, and that communication is key. So who can come and talk to me? Maybe there's somebody in another department who can talk and bring some relevant or transferable skills. So we just try to find someone who will help.
Okay, thank you very much. It's very interesting, Joanne, that you mentioned that point with regards to ERPs, because how many ERP implementations have we seen go way over budget and fall flat on their faces? And I've seen this in so many organizations where ERPs are like renovations. They take longer and cost more than you ever anticipate. And it seems like what's often impacted because of these cost overruns is the change management component and the training component. So then you have this reluctant workforce being dragged kicking and screaming through this change that they had no part in and no opportunity to contribute anything to, and they have no training. So Yes.
And that's such a great point, and I can't emphasize enough what an inefficiency that is, and how repeating training, going back and trying to re-implement, causes pain and additional costs. So the efficiency, the cost savings of taking the time to do it right the first time, huge in the overall scope of the project.
Okay. Thank you very much. It was very much appreciated. We had some really great questions as well. We're going to be taking a break, and we will come back at 3 o'clock in the leadership stream. It'll be our last session of the day, and we'll see you at 3 o'clock. Thank you.